Welcome to our podcast. Let's Make History Together is dedicated to Springfield, Ohio. We are a coalition of community members who are actively shaping a new, bold vision for our city. We are doing so through an initiative called Springfield 2051.
Welcome to the Let's Make History Together podcast series, where we explore the ideas and strategies that are going to shape the future of our community over the next 25 years. I'm Kevin Rose, a community historian here in Springfield, Ohio, and also the executive director and curator of Hartman Rock Garden, which is important for today's discussion because we're here to discuss one of the 7 pillars that we've identified in the Springfield 2051 process, which is elevating arts, heritage, and culture. So I'm joined today by David Beurle, the founder and chief executive of Future IQ, who has been our moderator, our facilitator through this process. So thank you, David, for joining us.
Thank you, Kevin.
And we're also joined by Marta Wojcik, who is the executive director and curator of Lloyd Wright's Westcott House. Most importantly, she's also my wife. And I mention that so you know that when I'm giving her softball questions, quite easy things, they're not challenging her on certain things, that there's another dynamic going on here and that I just am trying to avoid the worst.
That would be new.
Yeah. Well,
softball, yeah.
This is being recorded, so it has a life of its own. So David, I'm going to start with you. We've been at this for a while now, right? With Springfield 2051, we've engaged thousands of people, a lot of listening sessions, around 50 listening sessions, going across our community, listening to what they love about this community, what they think our opportunities are, what the challenges are, what they hope to see in the future. And one of the things that's come out is arts, heritage, and culture. And a part of that is just understanding that this has been a success and that we need to continue working on it to make sure it stays one of those successes, one of those pillars in the future. Can you talk a little bit about what you've seen in Springfield with arts, heritage, and culture and some of the response that we've seen?
Yes, of course, Kevin. So, as you said, we've had about 6 months of engagement so far with literally thousands of people. And we've been asking people, what do they see are the things they love about Springfield, what do they want to see for the future, but also what are the important levers that we've got to be able to drive and affect change in this community as we think about going forward. And there's been this subtext through so much of the discussion and survey inputs about people really recognizing a couple of things that are wrapped up in this pillar. So one is heritage, right? And people are so proud of the history of Springfield, and understandably, right? I mean, it does have a remarkable history and a story of success. But I think that's also related to the sort of brand or the proposition or the value proposition that this community offers. So people have been very interested in that. So that's a key part of this pillar. But also the arts and culture component. And I think people have really seen that as something that brings life to the community and brings the permission for innovation and doing things differently and having these sort of more creative discussions or experiences. And I think it is tied to that people are recognizing that at the level of the community evolution, people want to see this community to evolve, to be open to new ideas, to be sort of trying different things, not sort of stuck in the past. So there's sort of perhaps a natural contradiction in putting these components together. But in this pillar, the way they come together, it is really about leveraging and building off that sense of history, sense of place, that powerful destination draw and all the stuff that goes with that, the downtown buildings and so on. But also people are looking for this pillar to help drive innovation and stimulate new thinking and creativity. So that really at some level, it's really about shifting the culture in the community to be one that's more like a laboratory of learning and looking to experiment and try different ideas and celebrate. A lot of that is all wrapped up in that vibrancy and that beating sort of heart of the community. I think this is a really exciting pillar, and it's so many people have pointed to this as a potential lever to be able to pull, and why it's called elevating those components is because they already exist, right? And people recognize that, but people see the potential, so they really want to see leaning into this and really ramping that up to be able to celebrate the heritage, use that as part of your destination proposition, but also the arts and culture as a way to add vibrancy to life, but also more broadly to shift community culture to be very open and receptive and responding to and creating new ideas.
I should note that I'm joined today by two people who are not native to the United States, and both of you have traveled around quite a bit. David, you from Australia, and Marta, you from Poland. And you've had experiences of seeing communities that have done, I think, good work in this and how it's shaped the identity of a community. Marta, I'll pivot to you. You're from Krakow. So one, if you could tell us a little bit about your background and how I think that shaped you from what you saw in Poland to what you see in Springfield.
Well, I was just thinking about it as David was speaking about the importance of heritage, and it seems like people are really warming up to this idea, and especially I've seen it over the years as you delivered some lectures and gave some talks about the past, and most recently we did that 10-minute history of Springfield, and I think it's so important to people, and I think about it through the prism of my experience in Krakow. I think that Krakow is just incredible in terms of arts and culture, right? And it's like a key component of identity of Poland, really. And I think that it's something that will naturally come up as one of the key factors when we consider unique positioning of Springfield, because we do have incredible history as a community, and it's something that you can't manufacture, right? It happened over the years. The community was shaped in a certain way, and it does set us apart from neighboring communities that are not as old and as established, right? And some of it, I think, over the years has been compromised through various decisions, and that's why we come to this point where we think of, okay, this is something we need to really emphasize and protect, that sense of identity of Springfield through its history. And I think that's what when I'm thinking about my experience growing up in Krakow and how important it was to me, but also the exposure to culture and what that meant to me. I think that, I was just recently sharing with some colleagues about my experience in college when I was in Krakow, attending a school there. And I decided to start attending symphony. And as a young person to decide, okay, I'm going to go through this process. I'm going to attend symphony concert that is somewhat painful at first when you're not used to it, right? Sit in the concert hall with other people dressed up and listen for an hour and a half to a challenging score. And it was a revelation to me because I realized that I make myself to do something almost to honor my humanity, that I'm becoming a better version of myself because I choose to do something that is somewhat challenging, but over time you become that person that is interested in challenging yourself and listening to music and attending art shows that may not feel accessible at first. So I think it's something that, again, going back to that unique positioning of Springfield, I think that's the balance that we need to figure out, because on one hand, arts and culture is always challenged for good reasons to make it as accessible as possible to people. On the other, we need to understand that our role is to elevate people's lives, to challenge people to think critically, right? It's been always essential to this field to challenge people to think for themselves. And I think that's why I'm excited that arts, heritage, and culture are such an intrinsic part of this process.
It's interesting that you mentioned just that the role of these in our community. when I moved here, we'll say 1999, right, college, but 2003, graduated from college and becoming part of this community and moving into this community, I've acknowledged in other podcasts and other discussions that we've had that this really wasn't a place that was attractive. There was really there weren't a lot of things that were keeping young college graduates like me here in this community. But one of the things we had was arts and culture. Like, I'm a farm boy. I didn't grow up with classical music. I probably maybe heard it in an elevator at some point, right? But it was not part of my life. But being able to go to the symphony here in town and listen to a really great top-notch symphony orchestra, and going down to the park and listening to various groups as you know, one of the nation's great outdoor free summer music festivals, and to be able to go to an art museum that then was not a Smithsonian affiliate, but a really, you know, great institution, even better today, and having these things in a community that is quote unquote post-industrial, right? And then seen these new things that were coming online, like the Westcott House, that other communities didn't have. And you look at those, when you have art, right, it felt like everything else could come along in the future. And I know a lot of people that have said that. And one of the things we're realizing more and more, we know there's economic impact with all of this, but just the impact that you have. We were trying to recruit a major company to town, and to go forward to the end of the story, they didn't come here. There was a facility that was available in another town that was perfect for them. They didn't need to build it. They could just move in. But we were the finalist, and probably the leading finalist before that availability of land came along. And they came here because they wanted to see how this community embraced its history and its culture and its art. And I spent a whole day with them. Maybe that's why they didn't come, actually. But in the governor's there as well. So they want both the governor of the state to come in and make a pitch. At the same time, they want to know about what arts and culture is. And I think we're seeing more and more of that companies, when they're looking at communities where they want to locate and they want to be, they want to know that is a place that their workers are going to want to live. That they, even if the executive's not moving there themselves, a place that they would want to live. David, do you have any examples of that or things that you've seen along that?
Well, there's two comments I want to make. So one is that I think what we're talking about is, in terms of the arts, heritage, and culture, is that part of what you have to offer and can elevate is that wide range of experience that people have access to. Everything from sort of higher end, museums or musical experiences, through to more the everyday available components, which is like the wiener dog races at the Mustard Festival and the Blues and Jazz Festival and things like that, right? So but it's that diversity and that breadth of experiences you're offering, which is, for a relatively small city, is really remarkable. That I think is really important to look at, because you've got some people who want the full range of experiences, but some people just want to be in one of those categories, right? So I think that's really important.
Is the wiener dog races, is that culture? Is that how you're grouping this into the conversation?
I would put that in the culture.
Well, it's also about mustard, and that's the heritage of this company. Okay,
absolutely, it's part of your Mustard Festival, right? And so that's celebrating those important industries that are here, and the sort of people work in those places, and that's all really important, reflective components. And that leads to my second point, which is that I think the other big part of this is about storytelling. It's about telling the story of Springfield. And I look at this, and a lot of countries do this, but America does it really well, which is to homogenize the experience. And, so we end up with these repeated familiar chains that spread across the country, right? So there is this sort of anywhere America kind of phenomenon, right? And other countries do that to a degree as well. What I see people doing to somewhat head against that trend is to find that unique point that you have and be able to amplify and accelerate that. And that's often through things like murals and signage and those type of things, right? But it's storytelling. It's really telling powerful parts of your story, right? So here you have murals that are, celebrate part of your history as, the Rose City and so on. Places like Australia, they do, the wheat grain silos in the outback with, sort of what would be familiar stockman kind of images and so on. That's all part of celebrating history and heritage, but it adds just that actual visual excitement or vitality or dimension. So I think there's two really key parts in what we're talking about. One is experience, right? Like creating this wide range of experiences for people. But the other part is the outward-facing storytelling, where you're really positioning yourself in a certain way as a community and telling that through some of your visual expressions, which is obviously your heritage, but it's also wrapped up in arts and culture as well.
So we said this a little bit in the webinar that we had about just what has happened in the last 25 years. But specifically in this pillar, when you look at the last 25 years, we've seen the opening of the Heritage Center, which is, the magazine called it a Smithsonian in the Midwest, a fantastic history museum. The opening of Frank Lloyd Wright's Westcott House, large $6 million plus restoration of this house and opening it to the public. We've seen the restoration and programming of the Gammon House, Underground Railroad site. We've seen vast improvements to our Summer Arts Festival, including having a designated stage designed by an architect, right? The Springfield Museum of Art, a large addition, becoming a Smithsonian affiliate, the restoration of the Hartman Rock Garden, the re-restoration of the Pennsylvania House, the Performing Arts Centers just outside of that 25-year window. When you look at the creation of the Jazz and Blues Festival, I mean, I could go on and on. I'm sure there's people listening that are like, why has he not mentioned this, right? There's so much that's happened in terms of arts and culture. And we pat ourselves on the back and say, good job, right? But it's a pillar for a reason. And I think part is we can leverage that. We can continue building. And if we've done that in 25 years, what can we do in another 25? But then also, what do we need to do to ensure that all of these things are able to succeed long-term? And Marta, I'll hand it off to you as the director of one of these nonprofits that is a new nonprofit and working to try to do good work here in Springfield, but also struggling to just, make ends meet year after year as a nonprofit. What do you think we can be doing as a community, and what do we need to be doing to help support things that already exist?
Money.
All right, David, back to you.
Well, I do think that there is a lot that needs to happen in terms of strategic thinking as we all come together as arts and culture and heritage sites. And I'm hoping that because of this coalition and Springfield 2051, there is a foundation on which we can build and continue thinking about how we can all support each other. I think there's always certain sense of competition, right? Which competition is healthy, but at some point, we've seen over the last 3 decades that things get almost lost and then they get rebuilt, right? I mean, that's the thing. The Westcott House was almost lost, and thankfully the circumstances were such that there was investment possible, and it was brought back from a complete disaster, right? The art museum was going through the crisis just as I moved into this town, and now it's on really solid footing. Hartman, I mean, like you said, there's also a sad story of certain level of neglect, for years, right? And then these things got turned around because I think people who look at what community needs to offer, for your comments before, right? For businesses to thrive, for people to love community, they need to have those assets. So it's kind of cycle of life for these. And how do we prevent that? So 25 years from now, we are all actually stronger, right? And more sustainable. And I think there is a dilemma that we all need to have honest conversations about, because often these type of organizations are really expected to run on fumes, like we have volunteers. Why don't we do this on volunteer basis? Or we have, we have all this passion. You can do so much with passion, right? And I think that's just not long-term solution. And I think that you can have a person that is very committed and can make a huge sacrifice and run an organization for a few decades. But then if that's not set on a sustainable path, you lose these assets. So I think now we have quite a few people in our community who are leading these organizations, who are all in, who are absolutely committed. But if we don't get a good plan for all of us, these very assets that you talk about, by 2051, many of them may be gone if we don't invest into them. There is a lot of conversation about how we all need to be accessible. So there's always question about how much can we charge for any given experience, right? All those experiences, are they expected to be free of charge? Well, who comes in place to help us sustain these organizations and have professional staffing for these groups while we offer these things at no cost? I think we all need to kind of help each other as we go through this journey with the goal of being all, stronger and more effective in our work 25 years from now.
And that's also then true, of course, because one of the things we need and has been acknowledged in some of these discussions is some new grassroots groups, right? Groups that are coming up. But again, they're more mouths to feed. When you see more nonprofits, more things that are happening in this community, I would love to see a lot of growth within the Black community and seeing more arts organizations. There's some really good groups that are there that are really operating on shoestring budgets that can grow and really become dynamic. We've seen that with the Gammon House in this community, where it was this site that has really become, over the last, especially 10 years, a pillar in Springfield's Black communities, and what that means for community growth, right? What that means for Southside stabilization, what that means for creating healthy neighborhoods, all of these types of things. So David, we're looking to you to solve all of this stuff for us.
Great.
To have, so if you can just fix it all. But as you look forward in Springfield over the next 25 years, what are the things that you think we can do to really elevate this, but also perhaps make it sustainable within our community, that it's not something where in 25 years, the discussions we're having today are, well, look at what we had and we lost it over the last 25 years. What can we do to continue building upon it?
Yeah. So looking at this, and this is really we're going to explore this more in the next phase of the project, but I think the big strategic kind of issue or question for this pillar is really about creating critical mass, in my view. And so, Marta, you talked about competition for resources. Well, to a degree, that's like an internal competition for resources within the community. The bigger strategic question is, how do you create more of this being a destination where you're accelerating the foot traffic coming in that supports the revenue of all those organizations? Because I think the market potentially is the external market, and because you are so closely in proximity to Columbus and to Dayton, which are growing and have, affluent populations. And this portion, I think, this pillar, this sort of heritage, arts and culture, really feeds into that destination experience for Springfield. And how do you start to draw people here for festivals and events and experiences and so on, which is then kind of more exposure and it's more foot traffic and so on. So I think that to me is the key strategic question. And to put that into a very simple comparison. So if you look at downtown here, which is going through its own revitalization, you have a good half dozen very unique and different restaurant experiences. Really quite an eclectic mix, and none of them are cookie cutter. None of them are, but that kind of critical mass creates a destination because people are going to come and try different places, right? So I think that's how this sector could think differently strategically, which is how do we come together and create critical mass and start to expand this as a way to attract people to the community on a destination basis. But also I do think Marta's probably pointing to there's a really important question here about how important this is to the community as a topic, and how do we support not only just the elevation of what we've got, but the perpetuation or the emergence of new arts and cultural experiences and so on. So I think that's the sort of vibrancy of it. This sector typically sort of has a more come and go kind of a nature, but I think having that vibrancy is going to be really important.
Yeah. So we've talked a lot about institutions, right? We have quite a few of them, but there's also arts, culture, and heritage that exists outside of that. How it exists in our homes, how it exists in our streetscapes, right? What can we be doing to elevating this? Or are there good examples out there across the nation of how we can strengthen, this pillar, these fields outside of established institutions? How can it infuse aspects of our everyday life as we're going to work and as we're going to school and things like that?
if I could, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I think there are some. This again is a great setup for the next phase where we start to explore ideas and action areas. But I think there are opportunities here because you have some neighbourhoods that are very different and very distinct in their own right. So you have Southside is one we've talked about. We have other neighbourhoods that have their own very unique appeal. So I think that sort of story about storytelling at that local neighbourhood level, and that, in a practical sense, Kevin, that cascades into signage and wayfinding. That's the term. Wayfinding is the term they use, which is about how do people find their way around a community. Just sort of a tourism phenomenon. But signage and entry points and all those type of things, I think that every one of those is an opportunity to tell a story, to reflect a culture, a little bit of heritage. There are even communities, for example, in Ohio who do that, I think, pretty well, celebrating their manufacturing history, and they have sort of part of their logos and designs cover that and so on. So I think if you kind of step back and you go, okay, let's open the dams on this, right? You could have a whole cascade of ideas that are about how do we reflect this unique history and heritage and culture, cascading down to signage and, the look and feel of neighbourhood parks, or all those type of things, right? I'm the outsider, as I keep saying, right? I would encourage people here, though, to say, what can we do that's unique and different, right? Not the same as everywhere else, right? But what is right at the core of our story? How do we capture that? How do we tell that? I think murals give you an insight into that because they are a very visual representation. But you got to think of that in terms of colours and imagery and sort of language and so on. Even the thoughtfulness of the Springfield 2051 making history now, right? I mean, there's a very important date point because that's the 250th anniversary. But it's also projecting, into the future and so on. I think there's a whole world here that, that the creative capacity in this community could really lean into.
Yeah.
If I could just add, because I think that with Westcott House, we've been thinking about it quite a bit because there are certain limitations to a architectural house. For one, its size, right? So, and what we do well is, frankly, Wright is so well recognized nationally and internationally that the house does draw attendance from all around, and we are able to charge ticket, and that's basically makes Westcott for important economic driver in community. But then you wonder how else you can serve the community and how you can get outside of your walls and to kind of make up for that lack of we don't have huge space to gather, right? We don't have it's by its nature a very intimate experience. And while we have school groups come to Westcott House, there's always this sense of like, what can we do more to engage community in that important conversation? So, one of the things what David mentioned, murals, we got involved in facilitating some of that process, and that example of very unique story is Hattie Mosley mural, right? And I think about it because while, families driving by Westcott House, they see that house, but then they go downtown and they see that mural, and it's such a positive trigger for creative thinking, right? To work together as a community on building that community identity. Connecting us all through that public art is really huge potential, right? And of course, we only we have relatively small number of murals. I remember I was so excited and I was telling David about, we have these fantastic murals. We are so proud of it. And he's like, that's honestly, I've been around so many communities and you are just starting. Okay, let's just get real here. So, I mean, that's the point again about how much we've done over the last 3 decades, but how much more we need to do and how we need to figure out how to pool resources and do what is exactly what how can we get there a little bit faster to really make an impact on making Springfield that draw that you talk about.
And on what David was saying and following up what you're saying, Marta, it's about being unique to yourself and your environment. And Marta and I were having this conversation recently because good luck, being the director of a Frank Lloyd Wright house in Chicago and leading a project to paint a 3-story mural of a Black civil rights leader in the heart of the community, right? That's just not going to happen. But here in Springfield, it does, because these institutions need to think outside the box. We need to be responsive in our community. We need to be involved outside of our museum walls, where in maybe some bigger metropolitan areas, you can really get away with really being insular, focus on what you do it really well, which is, it would be nice to maybe focus on one thing and not 10. But here in Springfield, so many of the arts organizations, history organizations, cultural organizations are really thinking outside the box and doing different things. And what works here isn't going to work in another town. It's trying to figure out what that is and how it works. So I think final question, if I can, Springfield 2051, right? This is our 225th anniversary this year. We're thinking ahead to our 250th anniversary, these key milestones in our community. We've acknowledged all the way through, this is not about 2051, right? This is about tomorrow and the day after that and next year and the year after that. But we're trying to set a long-term vision for what this community is. As it relates to arts, heritage, culture in our community, Marta, I'll start with you, and David, if you want to join in. What do you hope? We're here in 25 years. We're going to be quite a bit older by that point. What do you think a successful community looks like? How is Springfield different then in 2051 than it is today because of the work that we're going to be doing?
I think one big gain for me would be to think of, these creative places beyond even arts and culture, like the restaurants you mentioned. We have quite a few now grounded in local, vibe. I think that if I had some level of peace of mind that they're going to stick around, that there is enough critical mass to support these places, to support those small businesses, to support our arts organizations. And also kind of, I think that identity, if we could solidify it, right? Because it does feel, I came here in 2005, so 2 decades tell me that a lot can happen, right? But again, it was difficult to convince us in 2005 that we would actually stay here, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, I remember coming here, and I loved the people and how it seemed that connectivity, and what you said about it's partly in the big city, and David talks about it too. It's really hard to get connected and get things done, but here the size of the community allows us to really communicate to each other without these additional barriers. Looking back at how it took an incredible effort to turn things around, to really stay focused on that and be like, okay, the next chapter is for all of us to have that sense of unique position of Springfield and figure out what it's going to take and work together toward this and check in on each other and keep each other accountable. It would really be amazing to be here 25 years from now and get that accomplished.
Yeah. I think, Kevin, for me is I think there's an opportunity here for more dynamic storytelling. And so I think there's a lot here that's like in the heritage and perhaps culture part that's a little, perhaps maybe more institutional. So like, art museums but so for example, a simple level, I mean, you have an incredible history in manufacturing, right? I mean, that's just it's a most remarkable story in terms of that Springfield, its manufacturing history and its importance in the country. But today you have really important and advanced manufacturing facilities in place, but you don't know anything about the manufacturing story here unless you go perhaps to the Heritage Museum, right? So what I mean about the dynamic storytelling is that much more accessible celebration, visually kind of recognized all over the community all the time sort of story, right? And I think that's also part of we've talked a lot in this process so far about people are recognizing that perhaps diversity here is its superpower for this community, their level of community fabric. And so the murals start to get to celebrating some of the diversity in history. But how could we in 5, 10, 15, 25 years have this really dynamic storytelling about heritage and culture and diversity and the thing, the beating heart of it. I think it's about bringing it to life, right, and really bringing it to the foreground. That's part of that unique positioning and storytelling. It's you sort of said, Marta, about being inside the walls. It's about how do you get that outside the walls, right, so that it becomes part of just the ambience and the experience of the community, and you see it and feel it all over the place. How that could happen, that's for the arts and culture creative people to figure out, right? But I do think the big opportunity is to really use that as dynamic storytelling that is really creating a really strong sense of this community, its history and where it's going. But it's on display, and it's moving, and it's vital, and it's messaging all the time.
Yeah. So, Marta, to go back in closing on a key thing that you said earlier, you said money. And I think it's also a great opportunity to say thank you, right? Because one of the reasons we've been able to do so much as a community is because of that philanthropic investment that we have. I know it's been the lifeline for Westcott House, from the Turner Foundation to other key groups. Our Convention Facilities Authority, a bed tax, really setting aside money for capital improvements at these types of institutions that are important for economic development for this region, bringing people in. But we've seen so many organizations, philanthropic foundations, be established in this community because people have left, they've made money, they've been successful, but they don't forget their hometown. And they've come back and invested in that town. From the Wilson Sheehan Foundation to the Crable Foundation, we have the Della Celsa Trust, right, and the Quinlan Foundation. All of these groups that are here to really allow this to succeed, for Springfield to have this. So when you look at this success, it's a lot of great, creative arts and culture people, but it's also investors. It's people that are behind it, and it's not just that. It's a lot of individuals, and I won't name their names right now because they would probably appreciate that they don't become on everyone's development list as I'm calling them out. They're going to get, their phones are going to start ringing. But so many individuals in our community that while they're not just, they don't have unlimited resources, they've decided that they're going to take the money that they have, some money that they have, and invest it back into this community. And we've seen so much good happen at places like the Gammon House, at places like the Hartman Rock Garden, because of that belief that this is important. So I really think also the next 25 years is going to be really dependent on the growth of those organizations, and hopefully more the creation of new ones as we see these things come back that allow this community to dream of better days and future successes. So I'm really excited about arts and culture. This has been a fun conversation. So thank you, David. Thank you, Marta, for joining me. For everyone who is watching and listening to this podcast, this is just the start of a discussion, right? This is the three of us having fun talking about what we think in arts, culture, and heritage. Now it's up to you. We're going to continue having sessions. We're going to have opportunities for you to get involved and share where you think this community needs to go, because there's a lot of great ideas out there, and really we're going to get together and set the future as a community. So we look forward to seeing you at those discussions. We'll be there, and I know a lot of our colleagues will be there. So until then, goodbye.
You have been listening to Let's Make History Together podcast. You can visit letsmakehistorytogether.com for more episodes. You may also check out springfield2051.com to learn how you can get involved in the process of shaping our community's future. Special thanks to our guests and to you, our listeners and fellow community members. The music excerpt used for this podcast is by Johnny Lytle, one of Springfield's legendary music stars.